Board of Education. This meeting is audio recorded, so please make sure you speak loudly and clearly for those listening. Before we do introductions, we do have a little change in our agenda for this evening. We're just switching items 2 and 3 because we have guests here so that they can present first. And then we'll move on to the policy update items. So that'll be the only switch for tonight. We'll go around and do introductions. Please make sure that you say your name and then your role. We'll go around the table this way. Kim Baker, Chair.
David Anderson, Vice Chair.
Judy Kelleher, Board of Education.
Emily McDonald, Assistant Superintendent.
Carly Anderson, Board of Education.
Terry Lynn, Board of Education.
Ryan Thompson, Board of Education.
Steph Cass, Communications Department.
Peter Leatherman, Morris Leatherman Company. Paula, DLR Group.
Bill Holmgren, Executive Director of Business Services.
Bree Shinley, Board of Education.
Dave Haven, Executive Director of Student Services.
Brenda Albrecht, Executive Director of Administrative Services.
Doug Van Zyl, Superintendent.
Just for the microphone purposes too, if you're speaking and there's not a microphone close to you, if you could just kind of move that down so that make sure that we're picking up all the voices that are at the table tonight. So the first item on the agenda, we're going to discuss the community survey report, and that will be Peter Leatherman.
So before Peter kicks it off, because he is going to go first, really, if you remember what I shared with you is that the two pieces of information you're going to hear a little bit about tonight, the community survey report and the facility component of this, is really hopefully moving us into a level of proactiveness rather than reactionary stuff like we've been dealing with for the last year and a half. So Peter's going to share some information. We've done some surveying in the past. There are some components of the survey that are similar to past, but it'll give you some direction. Then there's some components that are about future thinking. And then when Paul, Bill, and I share about the facilities, that's really what it's about. It's not about making a decision tonight. It's really about giving you information to be able to be hopefully forward thinking and forward looking as items that we need to address. So with that, most of you know Peter, but I'll turn it over to him.
Beautiful. Pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Thanks for moving the mic.
Yeah, just want to make sure it's close. To review the survey results. To review with everybody the methodology. We spoke with 625 randomly selected households across the district. These interviews were conducted back in February, between the 13th and 27th. That's important just for timing, thinking of what the things the board was dealing with back in February. That's going to impact public opinion. More in 2 months later, it might have changed on some aspects, obviously, with things happening in the district. Average interview time was 9 minutes. Non-response rate was 5.5%. The 625 random samples projectable to plus or minus 4% in 95 out of 100 cases. Once again, the margin of error is determined by the size of the random sample, not the percent of the population. So a 625 in Lakeville, a 625 in Dakota County, or a 625 in the state of Minnesota is plus or minus 4%. Putting up some demographics so you can see the profile of the sample. 55% cell phone only. Yes, they're still out there. 9% landline only households, and 36% have both landline and cell phones. Continuing with demographics. We asked folks first, how long have they lived in the community? 41% have been in the district for 10 years or less, while 32% have been in the district for over 20 years. Median comes in at about 13 and a half years. The typical resident has lived in the Lakeville School District. 19% have a preschooler or an infant in their household. 34% have a child attending the Lakeville School District, and 62% are empty nesters. And once again, this empty nester does not imply an age. It's a lack of presence of a child. So we could have a 23-year-old without a child. They're an empty nester for the purpose of classification. So as you go through the results, think about 1/3 are constituents of the district, 2/3 are not constituents of the district. 14% are renters. The median self-assessed home value comes in roughly about $380,000, $390,000. That's self-assessed. Oftentimes it's a little bit higher than what is actually on the assessment roll. Continuing, 25% are 18 to 34-year-olds, while 32% are over the age of 55. Typical residents about 46 years old. Majority are college educated. That includes postgraduate degrees, 51%. 21% are high school graduates or less, while 28% have some college experience. What impacted your levies last year, I mean, there was a multitude of things, but the overall macroeconomics was always going to be the major impact in 2023. You know, only 4 out of 10 referendums and levies passed across the state of Minnesota. It was the worst year for levies in 20 years in the state of Minnesota. And a lot of it was driven by the macroeconomic conditions. The financially stressed, you're down a bit. Last year, you were in the low 50s. We've seen a regression on this to in about 45%, the typical person in the state of Minnesota right now, indicating they're financially stressed, so it has come down. 2023 was really the high point on this. Actually, it was the highest that we had going back until the recession in 2008, 2009. And so just to keep in mind for everybody, before the pandemic, the norm on this was about 26% financially stressed. So we have come down, but it's still almost 20 points higher than the norm. And what happens with that number is, the higher that number, the more folks in the district that would support something they simply can't afford to. It's not a question of prioritization. They don't have the $10 a month. And that's what happened in November of 23. Women outnumbered men by 2%. And you can see the area, Lakeville obviously dominates geography, 77%, Burnsville 9%, and the rest of the district 15%. Checking in on some of the atmospherics. The first chart here is the overall quality of the quality of education in the public schools. It's been very status quo over the last 2 years. We're at 86% rating it favorably, 12% only fair or poor, 1% are unsure. What we don't have is, because we did not do any research before the pandemic. But I guarantee you, before the pandemic, the excellent rating was much higher. We've seen across the state of Minnesota, across the metro area, that's where people's concern right now is on education. We've moved from, in 21, 22, worried about in-person, virtual, masking, not masking. Now it's the macro concern on the quality of education. So before the pandemic, the norm excellent rating was 22% in the metro. We're now down to 10% as an excellent rating. It's been cut in half. And it doesn't matter if it's Edina, Matamidi, those cuts are across the board. What we don't have here that we see in other districts is a shift from good to only fair. Your folks have just gone into the soft positive. Many districts now, the only fair and poor is up to 20 to 25%. So the shift is not only stopped from going from excellent to good, but going good to only fair. You do not have that yet. So on the excellent rating, you're still 2.5 times the norm, but that is the macro concern that people have on education. And a lot of it is driven, especially for non-parents. Their touch point into a district is what they hear on proficiency scores in the newspaper and on the news. That's their source of information. What do they like most about the Lakeville schools? The next two questions are open-ended. 18% say good teachers. If we combine high achievement, good education, excellent education, that's kind of a 23% that are going around the academic quality. And then we have 8% and 7%, 15% pointing to the programming being taught. So academics, staff, and then curriculum. And then you do have a variety of other things, from sports to extracurriculars to buildings and facilities. Now, if we ask what they like most, we should follow up with what the most serious issue is facing the district. You don't have anything that hits 25, 30, 35%. That, in an open-ended question, would be indicative of a serious concern in the community. You have one that hits double digits, lack of funding at 13%, 9% overcrowding, and then 4 at 6% staff shortages. The budget cuts, keeping in mind the time frame of February for this discussion, enrollment growth, poor spending. If we go down to the bottom, the nothings, those folks are boosters. They see no problems in the district. They're different than unsure. And the booster core has obviously shrunk from the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was about 12%. We're now down to 5%. I mean, overall, people are just less happy now than they were before the pandemic. So you still have twice as large of cell size of the boosters, and they're positive throughout. They support referendums, they rate highly the communications, the financial management, all of those sorts of things. Now, how do they rate the quality compared to 3 years ago? On this one, the 3-year comparison is important because we don't want them to think about before the pandemic, because then we'll have more people saying worse than better. So 3 years ago, we're a year into the pandemic. People do have a feeling that things are moving in the right direction. 44% say better, 7% say worse, so about a 6-to-1 ratio. Norm on that right now is about 2-to-1, 2.5-to-1, saying things are moving in the right direction. Some specific perceptions. Does the district spend taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently? 70% agreed this year. The norm on that is 58% agreement on spending taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently. Do they trust you to do what's right for children in this district? Yes, 82%. Decision-making, 2022 was very difficult. For 2021, 22, you're coming out of all the controversy with the pandemic. So you are up from that. It's stabilized in 23, 73 to 21, better than 3-to-1 on that. Norm on this run right now is about 65% agreement. And there were points in the fall of 2020 and 21 where the norm was more people disagreeing with decision-making than agreeing with decision-making. Does the district do a good job of involving the community? Very consistent across the board, 75%. The norm on this has dropped over the course of the pandemic simply because in 20 and 21 it was very difficult to involve members of the community. Everybody was doing Zoom and not meeting in person, and it hasn't rebounded back to what it was before. So the norm on this right now is 68%. You've been very stable at that higher level of at least involving the community. Are they proud and would recommend the Lakeville School District? Yes, 83%. And then the last question on this is, this is dipping our toes in the water of referendum. The question is, the schools are a good investment, and I would support a property tax increase to protect that investment. The key on this is the disagreement, because we haven't told them if it's an operating levy or a bond referendum, if it's $5 a year or $5 a month. How many people in concept disagree with that statement? And it's unchanged from 23. 20% is the core opposition. The uncertainty is about twice as high, though. Normally that's less than 5%. So you do have people hedging their bets saying, I want to know what it's for. But at the outset, it's below that 30% disagreement threshold that we're looking for. Now, job performance ratings. This is going to take a hit. It took a hit in 22 with the referendum. It came back in 23 and then down again, budget cuts and everything happening. But the 66-27 is still very strong. Norm on this right now is 55-40 on the board. On the administration, 65-27. Basically, statistically unchanged on this. What's happened is uncertainty's gone down on the administration. Obviously, as the superintendent's been here longer, you have more people that are willing to give them a rating, going from 41 to 17, now down to 9. And the norm on the superintendent administration rating is 2-to-1. The other thing this tells us is the community sees the administration and the governance as a unit. I could tell a dysfunctional school district if the board is here and the administration's here, or vice versa. The ratings basically mirror each other in the minds of the community. And then the teachers, 84-9. Norm on this right now is between 80 to 85%. It did take a hit. The norm before the pandemic was 90 to 95%, but just everything is down since the pandemic. Overall assessment of financial management then, 73-20. Norm on this is 52% excellent and good on the financial management. So in the minds of the community on financial stewardship, the district has a lot of credibility with the majority of the residents. Now, the other issue that impacted the levies last year, not only the macroeconomic situation of the household, but the property tax situation. And like we talked about last year, when I presented the data, 23 was a very difficult year for property tax hostility. It basically doubled across the metro area and across the state, driven by the higher assessments that came in 22. And like I told you all, in 2022, everybody was really excited that their assessment went up 25% in the spring. Sadly, only about 10% of those people figured out what that would mean for their property tax statement in November of 22, opened it up, and then we had property tax hostility to the point that the very high and somewhat high, that norm in 23 was the highest. This is my 30th year of doing it, came in at 59% was the norm. You're at 49% right now. You're under 50%. That's good. You're on the low side of what we're seeing, one of a few districts, but still, it's essentially 50%. Once again, the good news continues to be if they have animus on property taxes, it's not necessarily focused at the school district. We can see the perception of school taxes actually goes down. I always joke, 30 years ago, we used to ask, who do you blame? And then cities and counties got upset. We don't ask that question. We just know that they don't blame you. That's the good news. The bad news is you're really the only show in town that has to go to them for a property tax funding request. All right. Is the district adequately funded? In light of what the legislature did last year, this is surprising in a sense. What we saw in 21, when Governor Walz came out and talked about the largest funding increase in the history of education for Minnesota, districts on this question, if they asked it in the spring of 21, it was a 45-45 split. When we got to the fall, it was 75% saying they're adequately funded. The governor said they were adequately. They gave the largest increase. A lot of work went into not having that repeat itself in May of 23 last year. And it did work in the sense of people not going to the point of saying, yes, they're adequately funded, like we saw in 21. So we're left now, you have a majority of people, 51% saying no, they're not adequately funded, 42% saying yes, and 7% are unsure. Some perceptions that we've tested now over these past couple years. Do they believe housing construction in the past 5 years has increased? Yes. We're now up to 76% saying it has in the past, it has increased. Do they expect it to continue? You can see it's now up 16 points from where we started in 2022 to 75%, indicating yes, they expect it to. So on the historical side, people see it, and in the future, they expect it to continue. What about the impact on student enrollment? This has gone up 20 points, with indicating that they believe that student enrollment in the Lakeville area schools will continue to grow at 73%. So on the housing and on enrollment, they see it and they believe it's going to happen in the future. There's also been a sea change, and part of it is communication. The question that we asked in 22, does the district have enough room to accommodate that space, to accommodate the student growth? In 22, 37% said yes, 33% said no, and 30% had no idea. Then we went to 46% said yes, you have enough space in 23, and now it's reversed. We have a majority indicating that no, there's not enough space. You have 31% saying yes, and you can see the uncertainty's been cut almost in half to 17%. So you can see the impact of discussions, communications, the facilities committee, the work that's been done, how it's impacted the perceptions on the space needs of the district. Now, We asked folks on a middle school option. Should the district build a fourth middle school? Should they add space at the existing middle school? Or should they do neither? This is what's called a pollster's nightmare because it's clear as mud. 38% say build a fourth middle school. 30% say add space at the existing. 13% know something needs to be done, but they don't know. And 19% said neither. The good news to take away from this is 81% view something needs to be done. Only 19% said neither. That's the good news. The bad news is there's no consensus on what the solution is. But at this point in time, I tell clients, you have to pick. You cannot wait. You will never get to the point where you have a mandate on this question. The good news is you have the credibility with the community in the previous questions. They will trust the decision-making on this because there is no clear consensus on what the right solution is for the middle school. If they heard the district was going to ask for a property tax increase, are they for all, against all, or are they persuadable? You actually are coming into this in decent shape. You actually have 3% more people saying for all than against all. So 23% against, 26% for all, 50% persuadable. This pretty much, though, repeats the pattern that we see now. 25 years ago when we'd ask this question, you'd have 20% of people that have made up their mind and 80% of people who are persuadable. Because remember, we haven't told them what we're asking for, but we now have half the people that have made up their minds with no information. It's typical. The good news is it nets out positive for you. The key is going to be the persuadables and what drives them. So we do our let's make a deal question. If you heard that the district was going to ask for a property tax increase for a bond referendum, what would be acceptable monthly tax increase? 27% say nothing, so we flush out 4% Minnesota nice, because it was 23% against all, ask for a dollar amount, now we go to 27% that say nothing. That's well below the 35% threshold that we're looking at. So we have 19% at $8 a month, $16 is supported by 25%, and then we have 23% at $24 a month. The typical resident is right about $20, $18 to $20 that are willing to accept a property tax increase, okay? So then we ask folks, would you support a property tax increase for each of these four purposes? Remodeling the high school space, 69% support that. Was the specific purchase new desk and furnitures for K-12 schools and classrooms, 69.25. Then we talked about remodeling and updating the district's 3 middle schools, 66.28. And then finally, the construction of a new middle school. You can see that divides 51.43 because there's no consensus we saw earlier on. We pull it all together for folks, and we told them that the total cost for this would be $186 million for those components. Does that sound like a fair price? Well, on this one, we basically asked this question so everybody realizes, because people get stuck, they're worried about sticker shock. And it doesn't matter if I'm asking about a $2.5 million bond or Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan, that was $495 million. You have about half the people that say yes and about half the people that say no. It's completely an ethereal number, okay? You don't have to worry about sticker shock. What matters to folks is how much it costs them. So when we pull it together, and we told folks on a $400,000 home, it's $17 a month, and on a $600,000 home, it's $29 a month. So if $500,000 is the middle point, the increase would be about $23 a month. So I'm not above the tax tolerance. And you can see that the rub of the construction of the new middle school on the divide, you actually have 55% support, and then we have 41% opposed and 4% are unsure. There's not a lot of intensity, though, on this question. We have less than 25%, and it's an even tie, 12% each, strong support, strong opposition. What's the reason for their position? on this? Well, 20% say education's important, 14% say it's needed, 12% say the cost is reasonable, and 11% say they have children. What's the reason for opposition? It's the cost to them. At 17%, 8%, my taxes are already too high, not needed at 7%, 5% no children, 5% poor spending. So this is interesting because what we have in the mix also is they agree that there's a need for space. Going back to that, it's the solution part. And so the needed versus not need, it's a 2-to-1 in favor of needed to not needed. But those saying not needed, their preference was to update and add on to the 3 schools. It was an opponent saying this wasn't needed, okay? And so when we then asked folks, when we told them, based on current enrollment trends in the district, a new middle school is needed on the south side, possibly outside the Lakeville city limits. Does this make you very much more likely, somewhat more likely, somewhat less likely, or much less likely to support? We have 38% that indicates it makes them more likely, 17% less likely, and 43% say no difference. On this one, it washes out with the somewhat less likely to support. Almost 90% of them were already opponents to begin with. So it really isn't impacting the support, it's only hardening the opposition on the potential location. We then told folks, instead of building a new middle school, the district could put a classroom addition on all 3 of the district's middle schools, remodel Lakeville South High School to provide additional classroom space, purchase new desks and furniture for K-12. So we're taking out the construction and we're going to enlarge and add space at the 3 existing middle schools. And that, we told them, is $59 million. And that one, because of expiring debt, is about $50 million in expiring debt, the tax impact is mitigated. So on a $400,000 home, it's $5 a month. On a $600,000 home, it's $15 a month. So about $10 a month. Not surprising, you have 60% support, it's going to be higher. It costs less because we saw that was a reason for opposition. 34% opposed. A little more strong intensity. So it does get a 5-point bump. But you do have that there's people on both sides that are moving from support to opposition or opposition to support based on what their preferred choice is on this. What's the reason for support on this one? Well, they're reacting now that the cost is reasonable. That's the shift. Education's important, needed at 13%, 8% children in the district. The not needed goes up to 9% because now you have those supporting a new middle school saying they don't want to do this because this is not needed. So on this one, it really is something the board is going to have to come to and make a decision on what's the right. You have a mandate from the community to do something. Okay, that is 4 out of 5, and realize that something needs to be done for middle school space. And like I said earlier, the good news is that you have the will, you have the trust of the community on this in order to offer what is the best decision for the future of the district. We asked folks, because it's a common, I've heard this a lot, and so we asked this question. Some of the district's facilities needs are immediate and some are over the next 10 years. Some people think the district should ask for all of its needs at once and not have to house residents again for the next 10 years, while others think the district should ask for the most immediate needs and come back in a few years with the next set of facilities needs. Which approach is closest to your view? Not surprisingly, it's ask as needed. Okay, if 2023 taught us anything also, it is folks are willing to support have-to-haves. They're not willing to support nice-to-haves. And they're not interested in you being comfortable, not you personally, but the district being set up for the next 10 years because they're concerned about what's going to happen in their household in 10 months. Okay? It's you come to them as needed with the request. And this is consistent across the state as an approach. Switching over for an operating levy. Well, and this is in light of budget cuts that you were going through back in February. So there's going to be more support for an operating levy because people are hearing about cuts. We have the property tax increase for an operating levy. We only have 20%. That's saying nothing. We have 20% at $6, 22 at 12, 21 at 18, and we actually have 12% at over 24. Typical resident on this one comes in roughly about $13, $14 a month for an operating levy increase. Now, we tested a $400 per pupil unit operating levy, which I believe goes to the cap. That's all that's, almost to the cap. So that's all there is. The state would let the district levy.
Can you do just one clarification? Is that on top of the bond, or is that a whole separate question?
This is on top of the bond.
Okay,
Yep, it's not in addition to.
okay.
And so on the $400,000 home, we told them it would be $15 a month. On a $600,000 home, it'd be $22 a month. So on a $500,000 home, it'd be roughly 18 bucks. But now you can see the importance people put on this funding, where it's above the tolerance level, but we have 74% support to 23% opposed to 3% are unsure. Strong support, we still have less than 25% feeling strongly. It's 2-to-1 in favor of strong support to strong opposition. What's the reason? It's because the conversations back in February. 25% say this is needed. 24% say education's important. Cost of reasonable costs in children, both at 14. On the opponent side, it's taxes too high, no children, cost too high, poor spending. If you just look at the need equation, it's 25-2. Who's making a calculation based on that? So when we pull it together and we tell them, in this test, the $186 million bond, not the $59 million add-on, and the $400 per pupil unit. And they're told on a $400,000 home, it's $31 a month, or almost $400 a year. And on a $600,000 home, it's $52 a month and over $600 a year. So on the typical $500,000 home, it's about 40 bucks a month. 60% would support the bond referendum, 74% would support the operating levy at this point in time. Finally, communication. 70% indicate that they're informed about district decisions. 29% not to or not at all. Strong, the norm on that's about 60%. How interested are they in information from the district? 67% are at least somewhat interested. You have 31% that are not to, and 7% that are not at all interested in any information from the district. This one varies, and it varies by demographics in the percent of households that are empty nesters. How does the district do in keeping them informed in a timely manner? Quite strong, 71%. Norm on this about 64%. Where are folks getting their information? Well, the district website at 21%. And then the grapevine continues to grow. It's alive, it's lush at 17%. Email at 15%, the district newsletter at 13%, social media at 10%, or at local newspaper at 10%, and social media at 9%. And social media continues to grow. It's really interesting what continues to happen as we just saw all the local newspapers get cut over in the Southwest Metro, with Prior Lake American going away and Chaska Herald. As the local newspapers continue to either go away or they don't cover districts like they used to, you have the growth of word of mouth and social media. Basically, you have 26% of folks getting their information from gossip. And on the word of mouth set, it's over 55-year-old guys who would typically read the newspaper. Now they get together at the local restaurant and gossip. They're not going to go to the website. There's no need for it. On the other side, social media. 4 years ago, people did not want to admit that their primary source of information was social media. Kind of embarrassing. They're more willing to admit it now, and it tends to be the younger folks. And that's kind of as the newspapers have gone away, you have this growth for the word of mouth and social media. How do folks prefer to receive information? Email, we look at this just as print versus electronic. We have 14% newsletter, 9% mailings, 9% local newspaper. So you have about a third that prefer something in print. Do they want to push a button? We have 21% email, 20% website, social media at 7, e-newsletter at 2. So we have about 50% that want electronic, and then you do have 8%, 1 out of 12 people, that the best way for them to get information is the grapevine. And you can see it on the final chart, the impact of the grapevine. Is it a major source or minor source? It dominates the information network out here. You're not unique. The suburbs now really have become outstate Minnesota on sources of information. So 83% consider word of mouth, informal discussions with friends or family, the district newsletter, the district website, email, teachers, employees, on down the list. So that's the last slide I have. Answer any questions?
Yep, very good. So, again, this is information for you. It's not decision-making time for anything, but based off of what Peter shared, if you have any questions or anything you want him to follow up on or clarify for you.
One question.
So when you're talking about the operating levy with people, that 440 PPU,
Yep.
what is shared with the person you're talking to in terms of where that money goes? Or
We told them, I believe it was to retrain and attract staff.
Okay.
See the wording.
Yeah, it was staff related.
good.
Yep. Be used to attract and retain teachers and support staff.
So for the survey questions, it only focused on the middle school aspect?
Yes. It had the component of high school. We added in,
Desks and furniture and some.
yeah, remodeling for additional classroom space at Lakeville South High School, but remodeling not at Lakeville South. But then it was desk and furniture, construction of a new middle school, and then updating the other 3 middle schools.
And those are based on the facility task force phases that they had brought forward to the administration through those meetings. So we built the survey upon.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not to say that there aren't other components that still need to be accomplished, early childhood, another elementary school, continuing to update facilities. It's just like, when you do a survey, you can't ask every question and think that you're gonna get clarity and direction. It's already kind of cloudy, even when you're asking about comparison from middle school build new to adding on.
Yes, that tension between the middle school, the new versus adding on, yes.
It's because it's a more immediate need, probably.
Well,
Yeah.
as you'll hear from the facilities task force,
Yeah.
we've got lots of needs,
Right.
But you have to be able to put that long-range facility plan from that group with the enrollment needs and the capacity. Elementary has been addressed hopefully a little bit with Highview. The next roll through is middle school and high school. We already know we've got issues at the early learning center, so that's not to say that there can't be combinations, and you'll see that in the next presentation as well, that as I think Peter said, some of these decisions are going to kind of fall to you as board members and us to give you the information administratively, say, hey, these are the priorities that we're hearing from the facility task force, but there's some other things that maybe we can either couple together or add to it, or maybe we shift a little bit in those priorities, and then we could turn around and ask those particular questions again.
And I always recommend because you have a sequence, middle school, high school, as you go, really no district can go for it all at once. And so the most successful ones, as they lay this out, they establish, keeping in mind that half the people aren't paying any attention, so they're not going to remember, but at least you've created the narrative of so we're going to do this year, then we will be back in a couple years to fix this. We're going to listen and we're going to ask as needed. Because to do a holistic approach, what the number would be very high. But it is very helpful with communication to share the chapters to the book, but they realize that there is a whole book in order to get the facilities up to date.
So the other piece, did you allude to it when you shared this information that we do have what I call the referendum cliff where all of those dollars fall off? You know,
He had mentioned it once.
yeah, so what year is that? Is that next year?
It's about 2 years.
2 years
So
from now?
When we look at borrowing in the near future, there's about $50 million that we can put in place without a change to the tax.
Because referendums are expiring, on bond referendums and stuff, so did you share that with them when you had that
It's
conversation?
baked in the cake for the dollar amounts we told them.
Okay,
So on the 59 million, it was $5 and $15. We don't go into that much.
details,
Yeah,
but
it's
you-
it's reflected in the overall number, just like the 186 million, you're only been bonding roughly than 136 million
Got it.
because it's impacting the top.
correct.
Yep.
So their agreement or disagreement was based off of a more real number then? of
Yes.
what- And so, but then that comes into our crafting of our messaging to make sure, because the one thing we always hear during referendums is you always are asking for more, for more, for more. Well, there are referendums that fall off that you're no longer paying for.
Yeah, and this district, I mean, back when I started doing this in '94, one of the first meetings I ever had was out here with this district. And, I mean, I think at that point in time, it was like, okay, 2 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1
Yep.
high school, just the rotation.
Yep.
And telling the story.
Yep.
And then reinforcing and telling folks, okay, as this drops off,
Yep.
and you lay it all out for them.
Yep, and we do, and we show them the,
But when you go to door, if you're campaigning, people don't. You know, that's the problem.
Right.
And it's a similar with the operating side of things. As
Yep.
you lay out the plan, you start out with attract and retain staff, but then you have to develop that plan that you share with people as far as how those dollars, because you just can't say it's going to be for attracting and retaining. They're going to want to know what exactly does that mean and how are those dollars going to be used. So it's similar in that process. You lay that out over time.
well, I think it's similar too. I agree. The other piece is, there's always the question of when you do bond referendums, should you be asking for the appropriate levy dollars to go with it? But then you're asking for levy dollars probably 2 years before you really need them because it takes 3 years to start a building. So do you really want me to tax you for 2 years? So I think it's really important to get the story out so they understand how that all works.
So and maybe we're going to talk about this with the facilities discussion, but with regard to the early childhood stuff, one thing I hear you saying is basically our community is saying ask for the money as needed, and as I understand, the early childhood stuff is needed. I mean, we're at capacity in that building, and so is it just tax tolerance where we're saying we're prioritizing and that would?
Yeah, for the
Like it
most
is
part,
needed at
that
this
facilities
time.
task force took a look at priorities based off of what they saw with capacity issues that we've had, and from what they're hearing for themselves and from people in the community of where they see the priorities and importance. I think to Peter's point, when you're talking about, we had capacity issues at elementary, where people are thinking, well, your next level, yeah, it makes sense, it's gonna be middle school, it's gonna be high school. If you started at early learning, people are probably gonna say, well, it was early learning, now it's elementary, now it's high, and move through the process. So to go backwards, it's not that you couldn't. I think it just makes sense to people to understand we went from elementary, the next wave is middle school. But that's not to say that you couldn't build something in depending on the tax tolerance. You could pull out some of those other pieces, whether it was the furniture or additions at the high school or whatever it is, to make it fit within the tax tolerance of what's there. But you have to be able to tell that story to the community, and it still's got to align with the priorities, and also help people understand, as Peter said, we're going to ask this year, 2 years from now, we're going to ask for this, 2 years from now, we're going to ask for this.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about if we are at capacity and we're missing those kids, and we know that it's so important to get kids into the district at that time, or so helpful for families and us. I don't know that, I guess I'm really wondering like how much the community pays attention to the process like that versus this, we're at a place where we need more here. And we're at a place where we need more here too, because we have new families coming into the district. And so I guess my concern is, one, it is a financial implication for us if we're not necessarily getting more funds from early childhood, but also then we miss that many kids getting them into the district at that.
Well, I would tell you, I think the people, and we'll probably shift there in here in a second,
Yeah.
the people that run the facilities committee do know, in my opinion, have been listening, are involved. That's how they got involved, to have that conversation. So it's not just the survey, it's also the people that were part of the task force that put together some of those priorities and what they see as the next steps. Brian?
I've got a few questions.
Oh, wait.
So number one, we're gonna have the survey online so folks can have access to it and see it. Is that
After you see it, and
after
then
we say we'll post it online?
yep.
Okay. So do you wanna make sure I heard this correctly, that the survey of the 625 people, 1/3 of them have students in the district? And so, okay, so then in my mind, there's a reality of what is the score for those based on who have children in the district versus a perception of no kids in the district, word of mouth, reading district news, website. They don't really have anyone in the district to really know how things are going. Is that a fair statement of 2/3?
Yes, parents will be more informed about what's going on,
Okay.
yes, yeah.
I'd love to, and I don't know if you can, like, I'd love to see the data split to see what the results would look like with people with respondents that have children in the district versus those that do not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I believe when we looked at it for amongst parents, I think support for when we pull it together, that at the end, the operating levy and bond referendum,
Yeah.
on a successful coalition, in an off-year election is 80% parent support. And you had that for both of these things that we tested, both the $186 million bond and the operating levy. So
Okay.
that's the good news. Bad news is they're only 1/3 as compared to 2/3.
Yeah.
In that sense. It also shows that, last year, the issue in an off-year election reared its head where parents didn't show up like they should have.
Yeah.
That they underrepresented, they continue to underrepresent, and it's been consistent since 2013. And it's sadly, it's the younger parents. If the kid has hockey or dance that night, they're taking the kid to that instead of voting. It's just, they underrepresent.
Well, I mean, and so if you've got 2/3 in your respondent pool, that, we still have good favorable results with that included. I mean, from what I wrote down, we spend effectively
Yes.
75%.
Yeah.
Financial management, we're positive. These 2/3 of the population with no kids, past 5 years, they've seen the growth, they expect growth through the next 5 years, and they also acknowledge that middle school is full.
Yes.
And they need that.
Correct.
And so, the takeaway, 60% say bond referendum makes sense, 74% say operating levy makes sense. So that helps me, so thank you for that. But I do have a question on the $400 PPU. I thought with the levy that passed, the levy one that passed, we were sitting at about what, 1,900, and it wasn't the max that we can go is 26 now with the new adjustment, or is 400 the max that we can go? Because that doesn't sound right.
The last numbers we have, the max is about 23, and we're at 16.
We're at 16. Okay, so we've got
$500. Yeah.
the max is 23, and we're at 16. So I would assume we've got 700. 700. So this is a 400 PPU, and with the assumption that other districts may go to levy and get to the 23, we're still sitting at about 1,600. Okay, and so if we did this 400 PPU, what does that equate to? Because we've got about 12,000 students, and so.
Yeah, that's a little over $5 million, because
Okay.
it's based on our pupil units, which is about a little over 13,000.
Okay. And so when you did the survey, you didn't share the $5 million that we would be receiving from this effort.
Yeah, they were told
It'd be like an $8-10 increase to,
400 per pupil increase in the levy would provide the district with an additional $5.5 million.
okay. And then what you said that we would do with the money was for.
If
retain
additional
and attract-
funds were approved in the levy referendum, they would be used to attract and retain teachers and support staff.
Okay. There's no other.
And then the dollar amounts in a $400,000 and $600,000 home.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the facility task force update. Bye, Bill.
Thanks, Peter, appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Paul is joining us. I think Bill's got to switch over the information on the computer. And so again, if you remember, we had put together a task force, and then when budget cuts and things started taking place, we put the task force on hold. We re-kicked that off again this last fall, and brought that group together. So Bill and I have kind of been tag teaming that. Paul's been helping us from the architectural side of things, and so he'll click through some slides and share some information. So that just kind of gives you the purpose. I don't know, Bill, if you want to touch base on any of that.
Yeah, just this is a reminder what the facility task force purpose was. We're looking at facility needs for the next 10 years. And of course, we're looking at our demographic and capacity and, programming to provide, feedback back to the Board of Education. And again, it's an advisory group, kind of decision-making body, and I think we had really good participation with the group that we had. So tonight we'll run through some enrollment numbers again. And then, of course, go to the feedback that we received from the facility task force combined with the, with those priorities, and then what is that cost, what are the tax impact or ramifications for our community. So you've seen these slides all year. Even though our enrollment has slowed a little bit in the year that we're in, we're still seeing projections of relatively large increases in the very, very near future. Nope, sorry, backwards. And this one we kind of want to just focus a little bit on here. We're breaking down the growth that we're seeing by elementary, middle school, and high school, of course. And if you take a look at the middle graph, that is the middle school. And you can see over the last 5 years, it's really been pretty flat. It really hasn't changed very much. We've seen all our growth in our elementary. Of course, that's why we have all our pressure in our elementaries, and that's why a new elementary school is coming on line this fall. But if you look there in 25, we're starting to see the growth coming to the middle school, and it just kind of explodes in the next few years. And then if you look at the high school, you see that we're right going into about a 3-year piece where we're not going to see a lot of growth. But after that is a whole different story. You just have that same group of students as they're moving through the buildings.
So do you have data like this for early childhood too?
We do not. I mean, we have some projections, but we haven't put it up here. We have growth there, but I couldn't tell you what the percentage is.
Okay, because it might be good to know the expected growth, because that's also going to impact the elementary numbers coming up too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you can see the elementary numbers. It kind of mirrors the early childhood, but I don't have specific numbers for early childhood.
That blue line, is that our capacity line, or what is that?
That's today's number.
What's our capacity line? So you don't have that.
When we look at capacity, like right now in the elementaries, we're full. Okay, of course, we're getting pressure taken off next year, and then we're seeing about a 6-year gap before we really are back up to that spot again in our elementary schools. But in our middle schools, we're seeing that we're sitting pretty good right now, but 2 years from now, that's where we're really seeing that real big pressure on our middle schools. Okay?
And I think the wrinkle in the middle schools is, as a whole, with all three, you're sitting good. Yep. But the different buildings independently kind of fluctuate between having room and being so.
Here's just another look at what's happening with the housing that's being built here in Lakeville. You can see that it has slowed, but of course those graphs all show increase. Okay, even though that blue line for single-family homes is smaller than it was a couple years ago, it's still more than it was before. We're still seeing tremendous growth in our community. So what we did is we looked at.
Can I ask a quick question? I know we've asked this before, that was for the city of, but what about Elko Nevarka, the city of Elko Nevarka?
I don't have specific numbers for the number of permits that we gave out, but we're seeing similar growth. We just got information here this last week about a brand-new housing development going into there with several, I mean, it's 50, 60 homes.
When I visit with them, it really just depends on the property. They've got some large property owners down there that some are getting closer to the retirement component and looking at doing something. So I visit with Tom. It's like, hey, they're at least starting to talk about it. And then I think we all know that as home values and stuff change, some people may be looking to go a little bit further south, and it also depends on the amenities that they bring in. You know, they've got the gas station down there now that's been open for a year or so. I can't remember how long. They're looking at some other things that are happening. I know the Raceway's looking at doing something different down there. So all those things have an impact. But he would tell you, at least in my conversation with them, it really just depended on waiting for those property owners to say, hey, I'm ready to do something different.
Yeah, and so I believe the city of Lakeville that you were showing there is the next 5 years, right? Is that what you were showing?
These are past.
That was past 5 years, yep.
That was, the last data point was 2022.
Got it, yeah, so, because the next 5 years probably is going to be bigger changes, or as big of changes with all good market.
Yes.
Yeah.
So before he jumps into the scenario, go ahead. Were you going to ask something, Ryan?
I want to go back to that capacity question if we can before we move forward, because if we're going to go over middle school, I just want to see what data are you using to validate that we need another middle school? Because I mean, if we go back, we get to 3,000 students, right, in 3 years from now. And I understand your point of view where each school is a little bit different, but at a capacity as a whole, like, do we need another middle school? I keep hearing that we do, but I don't know the numbers that say that we do.
Yeah. We have a capacity study, so we can pull that number for you.
Because we get-
And we shared that capacity study with the facilities task force as well. So that's part of what they built their recommendations off of.
Yeah. If you look at fiscal year '26, that's only a little over a year away. You see that, you see that moving, though, it's over 100 students a year going into those middle schools. And Century Middle School right now is full. There really is no space to be adding. With the boundary adjustments, there's a small adjustment there to help that, but it wasn't a very big adjustment. Okay.
But like I said, I still feel like we're missing data because we know that the early childhood center is full as well. And if we're trying to make decisions based on capacity, it's like the numbers aren't even there for us to look at.
And you have to remember that you're not making a decision tonight. So if there's a piece of information that you're missing,
Yes.
if you're saying, hey, you want that, then that's something we can make note of. But I think as Bill's pointing out, some of that is built into the elementary side of things, so it's there. We can just glean it out of there and show you what that early learning capacity is. But I think Early Learning Center would also tell you some of that is contingent upon the space that they currently have, because we're full at CLEC. They've got a waiting list that's there, but it also depends on, so are you gonna add on to that facility? Because if you do, some people that live on the southern end of the district where some of the growth may take place are like, why am I gonna drive all the way up there to do that? So some of those components really depend on some other variables as well, but we can get that for you, and I know that we're taking notes on that as well. So we can get that information regarding early learning. We can get some more of that capacity stuff that Brian talked
Yeah, I
for you.
think it'd be good
Again,
to
this
see
is just
that.
the informational aspect at first blush for you. It's not decision night. But so as you see things that you want to know, that's what you do, just call them out.
Cool, thanks.
So when we go to the next, before Bill jumps into scenarios, you can click through those or go to that. Again, these are based off of the facility task force taking a look at what they developed as priorities. And so then they use some of the information as well that Peter shared with you as far as tax tolerance and dollar amounts to be able to put some of these possible scenarios together. This just gives you an example of if we're going to do something staged over time, here's some phases that you could take a look at doing. And so like, for example, with that $158 million, that basically eats up the tax tolerance of that $18 a month that Peter was talking to you about. And in order to do that, that's a middle school. And Paul would tell you that's roughly what it costs today to build it. I don't know if you built some inflationary numbers into it or not. But I can't remember, does this include or not include the pool? I think this didn't include the pool, if I remember correctly.
You're right, that this does not include a pool. As you remember, when Peter was giving his presentation, the number was larger, but we were trying to bring you a number that fit within the tax tolerance because we want to pass the bond referendum, we're going to bring it forward. So this is.
It's
No,
part of
but
the
we have-
curriculum,
But we
though.
have pools in our middle school, so the original thought was we would build it the same.
So the facilities task force took a look at capacities, set priorities, but they also tried to take a look at equity and balance amongst the school. If there was a certain component in one school, they wanted to see if it was replicated in another, because you don't want to say, well, this school has this and this school doesn't, when you're trying to talk about equity of services that you could provide. So they tried to take that into account, but know that if you took a look at doing just a phase one of a new middle school, it basically eats up your tax tolerance. And again, these are just scenarios. We're throwing them out there, and as you see them, you may ask other questions. Well, what about this? What about that? We can put those scenarios together for you. So that's just one scenario. That would be phase one, and then 2 years after that, you could be looking at phase two, or I think there's another phase one scenario.
Well, we have we hooked a phase two to this, so we come back two or 3 years later. Again, we don't know exactly what the tax tolerance will be at that time, but to use the same roundabout number. And we have included an early childhood center. And we've looked at an early childhood 8 building, and then additions to both North and South High School. Again, it's a little different than it was in the questionnaire, because we really were looking at South is really our high school that's a little more, it's full right now. But the group, the task force, really felt if we're going to do something in one high school, we need to do it to the other high school. So that's why you're seeing both additions here at the same time.
And so what you see early childhood center, that could be phase two, or it could be another scenario. That early childhood through 8 building, that's a conversation about this is just, the team was thinking out loud, just said, hey, if you built something on the furthest end of the district, would it make sense to build something that could be added on to over time that could accommodate the growth in Elko New Market or in the southern tier of our district, but could all be on maybe one site, one campus to do it. So that's just, they were just throwing darts out there to be able to say, hey, this may be something that somebody asked, here's what it would cost. Yeah.
So then with the EC8 building, could that potentially be in place?
Yes, it could. If you had an early childhood building through 8th grade, it would probably be in place. You wouldn't need the other early childhood center, but you probably would have to come and maybe do some addition to the existing CLEC facility or something. So that's just how, if you take one piece out, you probably have to interchange something back in. Is that what you were asking?
I'm just more thinking like if there was something, are you EC8, is that, what age is that for?
Early childhood.
Early childhood through 8th grade, you could build one building that housed everything.
Right, so when we're talking about the other middle
How's
school.
that 68 million? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I guess I'm just wondering, let's say we build that instead of,
Just a middle school.
instead of the middle school.
So if you build.
Yes, that's a possibility. We were just throwing different scenarios. There's no way to say this is exactly what it looks like. We were just painting scenarios as far as if you're talking about dollar amounts, and Paul's probably going to say something.
I was just going to say, the
correct.
reason why it's such lower cost is when we were tasked to cost that out, it was a smaller section.
Yes, smaller section middle school than it would be a full-blown middle school. It would have to be added on to over time.
What if you built a bigger, sorry, microphone. What if you built a bit bigger?
Certainly, yeah, I mean, we could certainly look at.
We'd have to just put the price to it.
Again,
Yeah.
they're just trying to price this out to the tax tolerance. So it's just meeting the tax tolerant needs right now instead of our needs. It's about the tax tolerance.
I realize that, but I also feel like this is, you're asking for how many million in 1 year and then enough, like, instead of, I mean, as a taxpayer, I'm also thinking about if this problem addresses all of those things, if you make it bigger.
What we basically tried to do, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, was scenario 1 and scenario 2 are basically the same dollar amount ask of the community out of each one. So 158 million, I think if you add that up, I think we're close to that same dollar amount. Yeah, total
they're the
158
same.
million in both. So from phase 1 to phase 2, you're asking 158 million in phase 1, 158 million in phase 2. We tried to build that off of the same tax tolerance, assuming that it would be the same. You know what happens when you assume, but that's how the facilities task force tried to build it, was if you ask for it and people feel comfortable with that dollar amount, how would you phase that in over a couple of years? Does that answer what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm still just wondering if you took this piece out and put it in phase one, the EC8 building, and made it big, like, how much, I guess I'm wondering.
Yeah, you'll see, yeah, go ahead. You'll see there's some other scenarios that do something similar to that as we roll through, but Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, through the demographics, first of all,
Thank you.
I don't know when we started, but I think we assumed a 2% enrollment growth, and then some of these other demographics came along, so, and I'm sure
Yep.
you'll be shared with that, but, that'll be shared with you, excuse me, but, so the new middle school is really addressing what that capacity would be, so that phase one of scenario one was meeting just that middle school need. After that, obviously the high schools start to ramp up, and so do the elementaries, and correct me if I'm
Yep, go
wrong,
ahead.
but I think this request for the EC8 was then to kind of mitigate not only the geography, but also that elementary growth that could be happening. And probably less so the middle school at that point, honestly.
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying, is this is saying that we still need a middle school built, and this is other needs that can be met. If I understand what you said, they were prioritizing, they're prioritizing the new middle school as a need, and then these are other needs that need to be prioritized, but doesn't replace.
It doesn't replace
The middle
phase
school.
one.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
So you build a new so phase one takes place, this is phase two after the fact, that in order to continue to accommodate growth and location of students, that would be the reason for that.
Correct.
So can I just clarify? Let's say we do phase one, I'm sorry, I'm getting in the.
No,
details. We do phase one, then we come, this EC8 building would be separate?
Yes.
So it would be a.
The next
No,
phase.
no, I know, but then you're building essentially an elementary and a middle in addition to another middle that we already built.
No, well,
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yep.
So do
Correct.
we need, I guess that's what I'm coming back
We need
to
both.
is,
No.
do we need two
We need the
middle
capacity
schools?
It would be, again, they were throwing darts, because maybe in part of that, maybe you're then, if you're doing that new building and this, you're repurposing one of the existing schools into something else, whether that's maintenance facility, or maybe that's, you're taking one of those middle schools and early childhood center, or they're just throwing things out there to be able to say, they weren't trying to be painted into a box, they were trying to be able to say there's different scenarios that we would have to be able to discuss, because similar to what Peter said, it was hard for them to prioritize what do you do, but they wanted to be able to say, if it's $158 million, there are different scenarios and ways to Rubik's Cube this into the right needs that we have at the time. Does that make sense what I'm
Brian,
saying?
did you have a question?
So I'm thinking that the early childhood center that we have on here is kind of duplicating the early childhood through 8
Correct.
building.
No, the early childhood center is only early childhood.
Correct.
Yeah.
But
But why would
to
we need
Carly's
both?
point, the early childhood to 8 building is duplicating some enrollment for the new middle school that's phase one, but also duplicating the early childhood center, so.
Yeah, and again, I think a little bit to Doug's point, I think that was more geographically based.
Yes.
So that then parts of the other middle schools could possibly be repurposed. So this wasn't helping
But to all of this, I think there's a bigger picture
Sure.
of this is, and I'll keep saying this over and over again.
He's got
is
one
that,
right.
he's got a microphone right there. Is that we have,
You're the best.
a third of our school district developed, and we have 2/3 of our school district to go yet. So it's not like we're planning growth for, this is long-term planning, and this is really long-term planning, because we are going to continue to grow for years and years and years. So, I think thinking outside the box is appreciated on all of that, and I think once we hear I assume
Yeah,
there's
there's a
still
few
more.
more slides
Once we
to
get
it,
through
and I think
all of
Brian
this,
has
we
a-
can kind of
Brian
look
had
at
a
the
question
bigger
too, I
picture to
think, yeah.
prioritize.
Hey, do you have a scenario where there's a hybrid middle school, elementary school with a pool south of 50?
No, we don't have that scenario. You'll see what we have. And we couldn't put every scenario in there. We were just showing you what's there. So go to the next slide that's on there. Yeah.
Okay, so here, now we'll shift back to a total different look at scenario 2. So this is taking off the table a brand-new elementary, a brand-new middle school, and really looking at adding on to each of our 3 middle schools. You can see there at the top. So $20,000 square foot addition to each of our middle schools for $49 million. And at the same time, we know if we add students to a building, we have common space problems. We get squeezed pretty good. So that's why on KTMS, there's a gymnasium listed here. They're the smallest amount of gymnasium space right now in any of our middle schools. Within now that initial 158 million, we could go with the 2 high school additions. And have a lot of asks for gymnasium space at North to be, so we have just the same amount of gymnasium space at North as we do at South, so that's why you're seeing that gymnasium. And then here, an early childhood center could come on earlier instead of waiting a few years. And then, of course, we do need some furniture, pretty desperate need, so that is on the list. So again, so we can get all of these pieces for 159 million, or we can get a middle school for 159.
Not to get stuck in the weeds on the furniture, but I think one of the things that, as a board, that we all commented on when we toured Highview was the nice flexible learning space furniture. So would this be furniture more in line with that and not like a traditional like desk and chair? Like
It depends. Some of it would be, but I think our teaching staff would tell you some of them have old tables, old desks, old chairs that
right.
aren't necessary. It's probably a combination of multiple things. If we ever get there, that would be the conversation that we'd have to have.
Right.
You have a collaborative process to take a look
Right,
at
I'm
what
just thinking like
needs.
we're
Yeah.
talking about making the buildings more.
Yeah, you want to
even
make them more
throughout.
up to date
Right,
and more.
yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that.
So again, this was just showing you another scenario of if you did $158 million building new as compared to adding on. And then there's, I think, another phase. Is there another
And
slide?
now we have a second phase, if we went down this road, then a second phase here. And now again, we've included the EC8 building. We could give the ALC a permanent place to be. You know that both at North and South, we really need restroom facilities at our stadiums. So that's been an ask, so we've added, it fits here, so we've added here. Furniture, again, we need a little bit more. If you remember, when we did a study not too many years ago, there was actually a number that came up about furniture need of over $30 million. So here's just kind of, we're barely touching it. Early Childhood Center, and as you know, the space we're in is a leased space. So we're looking at maybe a permanent space for our DO, for our community ed offices, for our ABE program, all that could go into a different building. Maintenance, right now, we really don't have a maintenance facility. We have a very small lease space. We really need something in the future. So again, 158, well, that's 159 million, but the same amount. So these are all options. There's nothing magic about the way we put them in here, but it's all things we talked about with the facility task force. And as Superintendent Van Zyl said earlier, we really have a split in that task force of adding on to middle schools or a new middle school. There was no
The task force was
decisive-
very similar to the survey.
There was nothing decided one way or the other.
And with that, like the district office space and the maintenance facility space is space that tax dollars are being used for today. So,
Yeah.
We've got them on there as part of the tax tolerance, but they're already being, the community's already being taxed for those spaces.
There would be a small shift. Right now, those dollars, some of the dollars are hooked to our lease levy.
Right.
So the levy would just switch to debt. But there are other dollars, though, that we are spending out of the general fund, which we would recoup and save.
Correct, but I was gonna say, so those are kind of a trade-off on the taxes because they're already being taxed for that space just under a different bucket, right?
Yeah.
So.
It's not a huge number. It's about $5
Yeah.
a month per.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about tax tolerance, though, I mean, they're already in their taxes and stuff. And so the other thing with the ALC, if we build new, that could be a really cool, dynamic, kind of VOTEC-ish type situation that the community is looking for and needing. But beyond that, that would then open up some newly remodeled middle school space.
Correct. Absolutely.
I have a question. 5 years ago, these things were still on the list. I mean, there's no change here. And one of the ideas that was brought up at that time was, is it cheaper to build a DO with a maintenance part of it attached? Or maybe the ALC combined? Did we look at that at all as an option?
That is something we put together in the past, putting all those pieces into one building, which would probably be a little more efficient than the separate buildings.
Okay.
And as you know, we do have some, real estate where we could put a, building like
Right.
this.
So that could be an option, if it was cheaper especially. I mean,
There's still multiple options, and there's options, I think, I visited with the city. The city's gonna be looking at a maintenance facility as well. Is that something that we can do in partnership with them? So there's multiple scenarios in this. We just tried to put some scenarios together that showed you, here's what's possible with roughly $158 million. How this tweaks and adjusts, you as a board, and we need to be able to get that direction from you, which is some of those questions that I asked as far as what are our priorities in certain areas, whether that's human resources, facilities, finance, communication. All those things we still have to get some guidance and direction from you guys on. But I would also tell you that as we continue to move forward, November is a fairly big election. If you want people to be able to vote over the next couple of months, you have to have some direction of, if you want to be able to do that. We'll be able to share all the timelines and everything like that as well. But this is trying to put some things in place that we can proactively put together a plan that shows people, hey, here's what we're going to be asking for. Kind of like Peter laid out, hey, we're asking now for this. Know that in 2 years, we're still going to have some issues and needs. We're going to be coming for this. Even though they can be tweaked and adjusted, we have to be able to at least have that framework, because right now there's really not that framework in place to proactively address some of these things.
okay.
Go ahead, Brian.
I would like to formally request a proposal where we do have a hybrid middle school, elementary with a pool south of 50 as a number one priority. And now there are, I think, some advantages where if you build a middle school like a normal size that we have, that would allow us to take advantage of the Elko, New Market, New Prague area, kids that would come up, and that might potentially free up an existing elementary building as a whole that you could potentially repurpose into a early childhood education as an option. But those are just a few thoughts in my mind. So
Yeah,
that'd be my
I would say this, we can put those things together, but until you as a board tell me it's a prior, I understand what you're saying. We can get those numbers put together, but it's not necessarily a priority until the whole board tells me what those priorities are as far as putting a plan together. But we can make it as far as getting those numbers so that you can have those
Good
pieces.
option.
And I think Carly had asked about something earlier. There was a conversation about capacities. So we can gather those things for you,
So these
absolutely.
scenarios are the top scenarios from the facility.
These scenarios include the top recommendations from the facilities task force. But like I said, I'm sorry?
If they had $158 million.
Staying within the tax tolerance that we shared with them. Because if we could ask for everything, it'd be quite a bit more expensive to be able, somebody wanted to know about, as you had talked about before, one high school, what would that cost? And that was like $400 million or something like that.
Lakeville United.
Because somebody must have heard you say it and they asked. So we pulled those numbers together. So again, these are not set in stone. These are flexible. We just wanted to be able to give you an idea of what could possibly be there using that tax tolerance and that $158 million kind of as a total, if that makes sense.
Is there a way for us to know who we are not getting from Elko New Market right now?
And there's about 90 kids that go to their elementary school.
So I think
But they're
something
building a
that,
middle school, right?
And they're going to build a middle school in close proximity to their elementary school.
so I think something for us to consider in all of this is just who we are losing right now for kids, as well as when we consider the growth of that area, who else, like percentage-wise, how many is 90 out of the kids that or how many do we have versus don't? Just because if we continue that, this many, and obviously if a middle school goes there, I bet more people will do elementary and middle. And so, for me, when I think about, and I know that I'm one board member, but when I think about, do we build a new versus add on? Part of it is that long-term kind of, who do we capture if we build another that's in the south? And if we had and I don't know how this would work with keeping the early childhood center all together, or do we have a north and a south? Because right now, it's so far north. And so it doesn't make sense long-term to try to build something that has that EC8 that can pull all of Elko New Market, and we keep those kids, and that helps us financially, and it helps us serve the district, and then we don't have to add on, potentially.
Yeah, there's, basically, we can paint all those scenarios.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think just knowing those numbers would help me make a decision in terms of.
There's Credit River too,
Excuse me.
because then you have Craig Elementary School that's really, really close, and then you have Prior Lake, so you also wanna make sure we're attracting that area too, because that's expanding.
Right.
Pretty quickly as well.
Building it south would reduce the pressure on Lakeview and on JFK, and Lakeview's the one that's gonna fill up first.
Right. Well, I know that's something we talked about with the
Okay, that's
boundary
just
adjustments.
some ideas.
So again, I'm not necessarily asking for a decision, but if you have questions or things that you want to know more information about, if you'll please let us know. Paul's been working with us, and we'll try to get those things together for you to be able to bring back. And then at some point, again, we have to have the conversation from the board's perspective of, here's what Peter shared as the community's tax tolerance. Here's what the facility task force said were their priorities based upon the information that they had. We have to be mindful of that as well. They're not making a recommendation. They're just showing you based off of the information they had, here's what they see as priorities. You get to help design and develop that. But we also have to be realistic in saying it's got to be a multi-year approach, in my opinion. It can't be, you're not going to get everything in one swing.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to figure out how we can do that in order to still take advantage of what people in the community are seeing as we have growth pressure within our schools. And how do we use that to say, you're telling us, we've told you, we've shown you, you're believing us, now we've got to follow through on what we're showing you so that we can continue to grow and move our facilities forward. Because there's more to that list, from weight rooms to other things that I would tell you our folks bring up. But you have to get the main chunks taken care of first, then be able to come back and fill in from there. So if you have other thoughts or ideas or other questions, if you'll please let Bill or I know, and Paul will work with us to be able to try to get some of those numbers together for you.
Bill, do you have more slides to share?
Well, I have some examples of where those
Oh, yeah.
additions would go.
Just,
Okay, so let's
he'll
keep
flip
going.
through them real quickly.
Okay.
Yep.
Because some people say, well, could you even do some of these things? And so we just thought we'd show you that it's
Yeah.
possibilities.
So here's Central Middle School and kind of the natural place where we would put an addition on that building. You can see there on the east side. When we go over to Kenwood, the north side of that building really has a very natural place to hook on there. And then there is room for an additional gymnasium right there on the front side of the building without having to move any of our roadways. This is McGuire. Again, the south is really, the hook onto the academic area of that building is really the best place to put that, at least at this point. It is very congested over there.
Yeah.
Here's at the north, and where we would look at putting an addition and, if possible, a gymnasium. And then here's at south. And that, south was built to make space for an addition on that building, and that's where that would go.
For the north gymnasium, is that close, would that be somewhat close to the current where it's at now?
Right next to it.
Right next to it, okay.
Because the facilities task force said, is it even possible to put some of these things on? So we wanted to be able to show if it was or wasn't, because if it wasn't, then there's no way that you could even have that as part of the conversation.
So that south addition, that's a gymnasium and an academic center?
No, it's just
That's all
academic.
academics.
Because
So
they already
north is
have more, they
getting-
have more gyms at south than we do at
South
north.
was built as a 9-12, north was only built as a 10-12, so they don't have as much space.
But they do have the dome.
Well, that's.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Facts.
But a gym and a dome are utilized differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Only
Just
recommendation
trying
I
to
thought
think
is,
evenly, right?
when you do these proposals, I'd love to see what it might look like without the $158 million limitation. What would be the right thing to do? Because if you're gonna build something, and then if you did a hybrid, whatever it may be, with making sure that things are, the amenities are equivalent to the other middle schools, and if you end up doing the high school, each high school has a dome, so that things are equal across the board. But that'd be my recommendation, if you guys are in alignment with that. Or
I missed what you were saying.
my recommendation is not to be limited to the $158 million.
Oh, correct.
In your suggestion.
Yes.
What if you, I mean, in this, so if we were to buy a big enough piece of land, and you did it in stages, I mean, is that so I guess a question, and maybe you can answer this, is it like way more expensive to, let's say, add on an elementary school at a later date, if really what we need is a middle school and early childhood, and then when the time comes where we need that elementary school south that we build, is it way more expensive to do it later?
You know, it all depends on inflation and construction costs. I'd say if you can get the land for it all now, that would be.
Yeah, normally what you do if you know you're gonna do an expansion project, you try to buy the land at the same time. And so you have enough space to be able to do it. And it normally is, it depends if you're doing connections to a building or if you're doing standalone buildings. Because I think as you do architectural work and construction, if you build a building and then you kind of have a knuckle in the middle, like let's say it's office spaces, and then you build off to the side, that's different than having to knock down a wall, connecting to something else. Or if you build two distinctly separate buildings, there's a different cost to those types of things as well. I think you would agree.
And I think there's site infrastructure and things like that that you have to think about as well. You know, Century Middle School is set up where we showed that addition. It's already set up with that building's infrastructure, kind of leading that to be the place for the expansion. So if you're smart about it and you're planning ahead, it can be cheaper than it would be. But you know, everything goes up.
But it also depends on where the growth is at the time too.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just in our discussions or what was shared with me, I think that was part of the two-phase scenarios that they gave, was a little bit of flexibility in that second phase of let's address the immediate needs in phase one of those scenarios, and then offer some flexibilities for those options in the phase two. So, to your point, because you never know where the growth is happening, you never know, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of things. So.
Because if you don't, normally what happens is if you say a school district, and it's gonna happen now even though we're having the conversation, is that if you say a school district's looking for property, the price is this today, and tomorrow, now that people have heard the school district's looking for property, it's gone up a little bit more. And so if you can buy all the property at one time rather than piecemealing it, you normally get a better bang for your buck, particularly knowing that you're probably, if you're talking an elementary school and a middle school on one location, or even with an early childhood, you're probably talking 80 acres. To be able to do something like that, to be able to have enough space for parking and playgrounds and fields and all that type of stuff. So it's not a small parcel of land you're talking about if you're gonna do multiple facilities on one site.
So what we're saying is you're giving us all these ideas that came from the facilities task force. And we're supposed to think about these and have questions, to give the questions to you as soon as possible, I would think, because we.
Yeah, the more if you don't wait a month to do it, because we're gonna have to be talking about this over the next month or two.
I know.
To be able to get.
Work session.
Yeah, you know, because we're going to want to be able to have these conversations, bring the information to you so that we could put together what we believe is a reasonable long-range plan for you then to hopefully to be able to adopt. Because, you know, really before July, we're going to want to know if it's something you're going to be interested in taking a look at doing some type of bond, because or operational levy and bond in conjunction with one another, because that gives enough time for messaging. It gives enough time to make sure that plans are well developed and put together in that process.
So
as
the
well.
questions we have now should be given to you, and I'm sure after our next meeting, there'll be more questions.
Yeah,
But,
probably.
yeah, but let's get them started now, so
Yeah.
we don't have a
Yeah, and
delay.
we got several thoughts and ideas
Yes.
of what people said they wanted to get more information on.
Sounds good.
All right. Did you have anything else to share?
That's it.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So move on to our policy updates, and that would be Brenda sharing about policy 401, 402, 407, and 701.
Yes, we have a few policies to review today. They're pretty easy. I'll start with 401. This is our equal employment opportunity policy. Our equal employment opportunity policy, you'll see in item number 2, general statement of policy, that item A has a language change. The word gender is stricken, and added in that place is including gender identity or expression. This brings the policy up to compliance with changes in the Minnesota statute that includes gender identity or expression as a protected class. Further down.
Brenda, can I ask a question
Yep.
about that? The way it was, I was wondering the way it was written, just because it says sexual orientation, comma, including. Is that right?
Mhm.
Why are these, and maybe you don't know, but gender identity isn't part of sexual orientation.
It's just the way the statute's written. If you look
Okay.
up the statute, it'll list it like that verbatim.
I don't like it, but okay.
Yeah.
It's state statute. It's not right.
Anything else? Further down, you'll see there are some language cleanup items in item B and E. So those are just language cleanup items, no changes there. That's it for 401. If there aren't any other questions, we'll move to 402.
Can I just make a comment? I assume all 4 of these went to our policy committee, correct?
No.
Yes.
No,
Not the board policy committee, the administrative policy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And that's mainly because it was no changes, just
They're
statutory?
working on a different schedule than we are. They're
Okay.
working on the district scheduling to get them through, to get them legally and legislatively
That's what I meant,
updated.
yeah. Right.
We're working on the board ones.
Okay, got it. That's what I wanted to know.
Okay, policy 402, this is our disability non-discrimination policy. There are no changes there. You will see some strikeouts in red on item D. It's just updating the, I would take out the Executive Director of Administrative Services name and just leave the title in there, but otherwise no change to that policy. Next on the list is policy 407. This is the employee right to know exposure to hazardous substances. You'll see in section 3, item A, there's a minor change there where they're just adding the word Minnesota to the commissioner. So it used to read the commissioner, now it reads Minnesota commissioner. And that is the only change to that policy. And then last but not least is policy 701, establishment and adoption of school district budget. There are no changes to this policy. You will see some red line throughout the policy. That's just where the MSBA model has school board and we use Board of Education here. Otherwise, there is no other change to that policy. And that concludes the policy reviews for this evening.
Brian?
Yeah, so we ended up reviewing, so for clarity, there are two policy committees, one that the district is leading, and then one that the Board of Education is leading. So the Board of Education Policy Committee meets twice a month, and we've reviewed about 8 policies so far, and so I would ask that we get an update in the future, maybe at the next meeting, where those are in the process that we've already submitted. But I would like to talk about 701 if we're talking about this particular topic. And so I did email that to all of you guys last weekish or so, because we reviewed policy 701. So do we want to talk about those changes during this meeting, or how does that happen?
I think it has to go through legal first. If you reviewed it, like it has to go through legal first, right?
So
Any
we
changes
review
that
it,
you
and then we
made.
share that with you, the changes that we made.
Correct.
And
then
if
it
you
goes
are
to-
in alignment with that, then it goes to legal.
Correct.
So can we use this session to talk about the 701 that we reviewed and made edits to?
Or do you want to,
Do you want to run through legal first to make sure that there aren't things that?
No, I would,
no.
because we want to make sure that we are in alignment with the things that we wrote, and then that should go to legal.
We don't want legal to approve it if you guys aren't in support of
Yeah,
that.
correct. Does that make sense?
The step in the process is
We review it.
the committee makes their adjustments, they bring it to you to review. If you're okay as a majority of the board with it moving forward, then it goes to legal for their legal review. Is how I remember the
So
process being laid out.
That's correct, and so what Brenda bringing forward with 701 is just language changes.
Just anything that would be updated for statute.
For statute changes, thank you. And so what Brian is saying, since we also updated it from a few changes, do we want to visit that now and resend that to legal after you guys look at what we're talking about?
Yes. Because we're talking about 701.
So kind of remove it from the agenda for the meeting.
Well, I think what they're saying is it still has to go through the school board meeting.
I think
Yeah, what
that, I
he's
think there's
saying-
two things, what he's asking is, the board committee made some adjustments to
Right.
policy 701 that are different than just the changes that were statutory or legislatively changed. Because that's what we're bringing to you administratively. So there were some information, I think, the committee that Brian sent to you on Friday or Saturday or whatever it
Yeah.
was.
The one that I asked for
So
color copies and
Yeah.
100 pages.
statutorily, we can still move forward voting on 701 with these changes to align?
Yes.
But Brian's just saying, we've already updated this, so when we're on it, should we take a look at what
Right.
we're asking for?
Sure.
And then cross it off the
Cool.
list and mark
Is
it
that right?
done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or-
All right.
So we're still gonna vote on these changes that Brenda's
Yes.
recommending?
Right.
And if you like what we have, then it would be an
And
enhancement
then,
to
and
your.
then 701 would come back after the legal review
Yes.
for you to
For-
make
Yes.
a revision. This is
Correct.
just updates legally, legislatively, changes or revisions are remember you got revision and review.
Yes.
This is review, what the committee would have done would have been a revision because it changed
Yes.
something within
And
there.
technically, this is an addition to the agenda because it's an item we're already discussing.
Correct.
So just clarifying.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So we're
Talk to the
saying
committee.
that Bree and Brian and
And Judy
Judy,
are gonna talk about 701.
and all three of them agreed that this was a good thing.
Yes.
We were close.
Okay, good.
Sure, we were close. 3 out of 4
I don't know,
bullets.
that we just agreed it was worthy enough to bring
Bring
to
it
the
forward.
board for
Okay.
Yes.
So I don't know if we have
Okay,
the ability
Bree.
to share this on the screen or not. Nope, we do not. Okay, so I'll have to read this out loud. So again, policy 701 is the establishment and adoption of the school district budget. So we thought it would be good to kind of get this up further upstream and review that. So we ended up reviewing it, had lots of good discussion. Not a lot of changes, so if you compare both, you won't be able to read it on your iPad because it doesn't have Microsoft Word to give you track changes. So I'll have to read the ones that I think we did add.
Did you send this to us?
I sent it to you
Yeah.
last week.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
what I thought.
Did you read it?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
So,
good.
Are you good with it?
Yeah.
All right.
All 100 pages, but okay.
Okay. All right, so the requirement here in A is that the superintendent or such, other school officials will prepare the preliminary revenue and expenditure budgets for review by the Board of Education. There are 2 bullets that we added that is not in the original one. So the first bullet is that in addition, all budgets will include revenue sources and expenditure data at the object level with the 3-year historical view, current view, and proposed view. The preliminary budget will also display the dollar and percentage variance from the revised year. So in the email that I sent to you guys, we gave you an example of how Lakeville provided their fiscal year 2014 budget that had those examples. So they broke it out at the object level versus the high level category level. It does make the budget packet about 65 pages or more.
He's talking about the budget book.
The budget book,
Yeah.
But what it does is it provides additional transparency around how much is the teachers and district office and superintendent, how much is the school board. I mean, it is at the program object level, which is how we track things, correct? I believe?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they sent examples of what past did, and we've already built that statement into the next one you'll receive from us.
That we'll receive? Perfect,
Yeah.
perfect, yep. And so if you want examples to see what it looks
It's
like.
very doable, we've done it in the past.
Yes.
It's just going back to a practice we used to do.
Yep. The second bullet is percentage variances over 10% and or greater than 100,000 variance will be accompanied with commentary in the budget packet. So when it looks at previous years, if something goes up 10% or $100,000 or more, some sort of sentence, some sort of description that says, here's why it happened.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Why did you change the past practice?
Why did we go from that? It was just it was changed actually, I think when Bauman was our business director, he just consolidated the number of pages of the budget book and condensed it, and that was just something that he changed.
What I've been presenting is what it was here when I
What
came.
it was when he came is what he's been presenting, yep. So it just got changed during, I think, his second year as business director. And so it's just going back to just making a bigger budget book to
And
review.
all the information is in the budget.
Yep.
It's just how it's presented to you
And to the
Yeah,
public.
and to the
Is there
public.
any way though, I mean, I hate to be the person that's like save the trees, but is there any way to, well, I don't hate to be that person.
It's only electronic.
Well, but sometimes we do get a physical copy of some things.
Yeah, I always give you
Right.
a paper copy besides electronic.
So can we have like an abbreviated version and access to something that is longer, or is that too much?
I would like all 65 pages.
But
I
I
just
think
asked for
it's
electronic, I don't
yeah.
take paper.
Either we
Yeah,
can just
let's just
pass
do
an electronic
electronic.
version.
Yeah.
Okay, not have paper.
I would guess I would say this is, if the board approves the process, then I think we can have the conversation of how do you want to receive it. You may want to receive it electronically.
Yeah.
Another board member may want to get it printed. Instead of just printing it out for all 7, there may be somebody who wants hands-on, somebody who doesn't. So that's what I would say. When we
Okay.
get to that point, we can probably ask that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so the third bullet out of 4 that we added was that the Board of Education shall review the preliminary budget by placing the item on the agenda for a minimum of 3 regular Board of Education meetings spanning no less than 75 calendar days. So we wanted it officially in a policy where while they may be presented during a working session and reviewed during a working session, my point of view, and I think the policy's point of view, the majority maybe, is that how do we make sure that the budget is available during regular board meetings? And for those who want to see it, have ample time to review it. And so that is why when we have policies, we review policies at 2 regular readings before we make it official. If we're gonna spend $198 million, it probably makes sense that we make sure that it's in a regular board meeting more than once. So we allocated a minimum of 3 regular board meetings and no less than 75 calendar days. So keep in mind, a budget needs to be approved by June 30-ish. So if you go 30 days or 90 days up, right, you got June, May, April, a budget ought to be presented no later than around April-ish, so that the Board of Education has 3 regular board meetings to review it.
And
Does
if I'm
that-
not
Can-
mistaken,
I don't
you're
understand
already
what-
presenting it twice to us, right?
Yeah, I always present it twice.
Yeah,
That's
so this
not a
is
problem.
adding a third time.
To go all the way up to April or end of March, we will not have a complete budget. We're still working through the budget now. Staffing is not complete. The numbers will not
envision
be
things will-
even close
we
to
talked
final.
about
So
that,
we
yeah.
talked about that, because we did pull up on the district website, you do have the timeline, you know, a budget timeline. We did talk about that, and we knew that the first time it was gonna be presented was going to be very preliminary,
Okay.
and so forth, so.
I guess I just want to say, the detail that you're asking for, I won't have ready in April. You know, if we really look at a object budget by program, it won't be even close to final.
Well, so
If
here's-
we want to look at
And that would-
program level at a more summarized version, we can get some.
That would be my
preliminary.
concern with that being in policy, just the way you spelled it out. Because if you're going to say you want it object code,
Yep.
to me, it makes sense from what I just heard Bill say in our conversation. It can probably be done in the last two presentations. But your initial one, I think you'd have to have additional wording in your policy to make that make sense and be able to follow that policy.
So let's
Because we
unpack-
wouldn't be able to
yeah.
give that level of object code in the first presentation.
So let's unpack that, because I'm having a tough time that if we're gonna spend $198 million and our budget starts July 1st, we're not gonna have a budget ready by like 9. You're not gonna have a budget ready with a project object code by 90 days in advance.
No, we haven't even finished our staffing.
Staffing isn't done
Okay.
yet. That
I
was the
don't know.
conversation we had, was around staffing.
But when does staffing get done then?
April?
End of April.
Depends.
Yeah,
That's why by mid-May, we have a pretty much solid budget.
Okay.
Not a problem. I guess one other thing to say, instead of an actual board meeting, I mean, can't we use some work sessions to work through the budget?
Yeah.
No, the regular board meeting was designed so that we have at least the budget on the table for the community, for stakeholders, for us to be able to have ample time to review it. Last time, we got the budget in a very short period of time, and then we had to and then we had to vote it all at once and super quickly. I mean, that was my experience, and I don't know what other budget processes experiences before, but that's our recommendation.
I feel like I can't remember, but if we had I'm sorry, my memory's failing me, children. But if we had a board session, and then we had a work session, and then we had a board session, doesn't that offer the opportunity for
For the work session.
for the work session to be like, this is your place to ask questions about the budget,
Yes, but
and then to approve it?
so when we have a work session, we generally get it introduced to us. Then we have a regular board meeting where the community generally would get involved or would want to see it. And then if we have another working session, then we can ask questions. We should have another regular board meeting so that the community might want to ask questions at those meetings. And then it may not be on a working session after that, and then we vote it at the third regular board meeting.
Okay, so let's just go back to the survey that we saw, and there's 11%, 15% of the people get their information from board meetings. So, you know, I know that when we talked about this with the minimum of 3, and it always gets presented to us in 2, to Carly's point, you know, I think for us to have it like in a work session and then we get it presented at a board meeting, we have another work session and then finally vote on it in June, that'll actually put it in front of the community 4 times.
Right.
And so, you know, I think the problem with this thing, and this was some of the conversation we had, is no less than 75 calendar days versus no less than, is it 60 calendar days, whatever. But I think it's more important, instead of the number of calendar days prior to us voting on it, is how many times it gets before us in the community. And we could potentially, if we target 3, we're more than likely gonna see it 4. If it's gonna be in front of the 2 board meetings, it'll be in front of us for 2 workshops, because we have workshops about the topics on our board meetings.
Well, I mean, you can have a regular board meeting and have it presented to us, and then it gives us time to review it over the 2-week session before we have our working session. I mean, you gotta keep in mind, when we get these budgets presented to us, and again, I only have 1 year of an example, is that we get presented, I'm not ready to ask questions right off the bat. I don't know if you guys are. I mean, I don't know if you've read the packet, and again, if the packet's now gonna be 65 pages or so, you're gonna have questions, and like, that's our job. Your job is to be managing the budget, having governance over it, and if you only need 3 sessions, that's not enough for me. And so, if you had a regular board meeting, presented to the public, presented to us for the first time, followed by a working session where we have time to digest, ask questions, another regular board meeting for the group and the community members to see if they want to be involved or they've got questions. You follow that up with another working session, and then you vote at the third regular board meeting. That makes sense. I mean, we can't vote on $198 million in 2 months. Like, they're just, at my company, we do forecasting and we're planning six months ahead, guys.
But it's
the-
different.
the
I have
a
budget
suggestion.
and the budget, the way the budget process works, not just for our school district,
Understand.
but for all school districts, is so out of the norm. That
Let's be
in the
different. Let's be
business,
bold.
You know.
Not hard.
Well,
It's
it
not
is hard to be
possible.
bold when we don't have all the details, and
Then
staffing is a
So-
step.
Well, I
And
guess,
on
well,
the-
one thing to remember, I mean, we did bring a forecast to you back in February. It's not like we haven't presented next year's budget at this point.
Right.
But we don't have the detail, and to put it together in the book form by April,
Oh, I don't
I'd
think
say
he's
it's almost an
asking for it in
impossibility.
book
I would want, because it's at the project object level by end of April.
No, I don't,
And then you have a
you're not,
working session in
he's
May.
not asking for a preliminary budget in,
Well, in order to have that detail, you'd have to have it in book form.
Bree, what is
And
your?
what I'm trying to say is, by the object level, we're not gonna have final numbers in April.
No,
It's impossible.
and this was so he wrote on here hot topic, and that was another hot topic about this one too, but this was a back and forth conversation the whole time. So then when I was sitting with the group, and I said, you know what, let's bring it to the board, let's discuss it, because we weren't getting anywhere, because we were talking about legislative updates. We didn't know how much money we were gonna be getting by April, and we were talking back and forth. Brian, we're talking with you, but
Yeah, I did.
it's a different way of finance compared to what your business does. But it's just because of the timelines of everything that rolls out for budget wise.
I think another thing to remember is a legislative session is not done until, lots of times.
May.
Yes.
Well, or even
No,
Yeah, we
it's
talked about
it's like the third week in May.
But don't we know, like in January,
No.
let me rephrase that. In January, we know that we're gonna anticipate 200 extra students, right?
Yes.
We know the cost of Doug. Everybody knows the cost of Doug, you know? We know the cost of the of the school board members, right? I mean, and we know how many teachers we may have or may not have. And so it's not hard to preliminarily forecast our expenditures for the year. We know what our utility bills are gonna be. We know what our transportation bill is gonna be. And so I guess I'm having a tough time
But we don't
how
know
we
what-
can't have a preliminary
That's,
budget.
that's what he did in
The
February.
pieces you've just talked about is maybe 10% of the budget,
Yes.
maybe.
And that's what we get in February and stuff like that, so that's what we get. But what we don't know is legislatively what's gonna impact us and how all that plays into. And it can
Affects the
take a
staff.
big swing from one year to,
Right,
and then staffing is a huge piece.
Yeah.
I have a suggestion. I suggest that we give this back to the policy committee to look at
That
again.
wasn't the goal. The goal was to get ideas.
And then come back with a presentation.
Can I ask this question, just from? Yeah, you can. Can I ask this question? Because it sounds like what I heard Bill say, that it's doable to try to do it in 3.
Yes.
Can he at least try to do, before you make the major change to the budget and say, hey, we're gonna have to have 90 days or whatever, based off of what I heard the group say, can he try to roll it out in 3? Am I putting you on the spot? And if I am, say shut up, Doug.
We can do it
Yeah.
we can do it in 3. I have a-
If he can do it in 3, can he try to roll it out in
Yeah.
3 to see if that meets the needs of what you as the policy committee said? And then if that works, we could take that and make that adjustment in the policy the way you were recommending. Would that be a reasonable compromise on that?
I was gonna say
So,
compromise too.
the problem I'm trying to solve is last year, I felt rushed through the budget process. Okay, that's the problem I'm trying to solve. If I felt rushed and I couldn't comprehend the budget as well as I mean, I don't know how many stakeholders and community members would be able to comprehend the budget.
I'm
as
gonna
well.
tell you almost nobody, because school finance is not.
But the
I
last year we were
understand.
rushed through the process because we had budget cuts and staffing that went so late into the year.
Yes.
And that was the board taking that much time to do those budget reductions. And so we didn't have that done until April. And so that
So
was
play-
a different scenario than we
Agreed,
normally
so let's play
deal
this out.
with.
So end of April.
Welcome
reg-
to policy committee.
End of April,
Give
a
it back
regular
to the
board
policy
meeting.
For that one.
A regular board meeting is like, I'm gonna make a day up, like April 26th, right? That could be the first presentation, as much as you can share at that time. 2 weeks later, we'd have our working session, we would talk through it, but again, the intent is so that we've got enough time for if you have questions, if Brian Thompson has 10 questions, that's the time.
Only
That's
10,
the
just
time,
10.
right. That's, I mean, we wanna make sure.
we doesn't
Let's
get
just-
to the
Right,
treasurer
but hang on,
that-
so if we
Right.
walk through that, so then May would be the working session, then the end of May would be the second regular board meeting. June would be a working session, and then we would review it one more time and vote on it by the regular board meeting of June. So that gives you your 3, that gives you that roughly 75-day window.
But I'm gonna tell you, my concern that I shared with that scenario is that first budget that would be presented at a regular board meeting in April would be so not close that when we go to present the next one, there'd be a lot of explaining to our community about the change from April to May. And so I think it starts with a work session possibly, you know, a work session and then a May and then another work session and then the June for the vote.
Yeah.
So that does put it before the community for 2 months, 60 days. And, you know, we have, I mean, to me, I still think that that's,
Yes.
It's still 4 times, because it's still being
I
presented to the
agree.
community.
I mean,
Let's
the
compromise.
the working session is one where we're rarely gonna ask questions, because we're reading the packet. Then we have a regular board meeting where
And the work session
generally.
is the place to ask the
That's what you
questions.
ask questions at work sessions.
I know, but when we get the document during the work session, not everybody asks questions right away. I mean, there's a lot of information that you've got to digest at times. And so if we've got a regular board meeting thereafter, how many of you guys how often do we ask those kind of questions, like a working session, in a regular board meeting? Very rare. So then
That's not the purpose of the board meeting. I'm sorry.
Okay, so then if it's not the purpose of the board meeting,
Right.
right? So then the next
Those
opportunity,
questions are gonna be the
next
work
opportunity
sessions.
for me to really ask my questions would be, let's say, the next working session, and then after that, I gotta vote. So where do I have enough time to digest, to
Well, as-
review, and ask
let me make-
questions?
As a treasurer, I think you
Yeah.
should have an extra meeting with Bill
Yes.
and work on that.
I think that's a good idea.
I will have 5
Bill.
meetings with you.
Sorry,
I guess,
So what are we gonna do with this? Are we
I-
gonna move on here, or what are we gonna do?
yeah.
I think it is a question of, one of the things too that I think about is last year when 4 of us started, we were very new and we didn't understand things. And so some of the challenge was the very steep learning curve that happened last spring in a very difficult time when we were making budget cuts, which was very intense. So part of it is having experience and education and knowing what you're talking about and seeing things in repetition helps in terms of us knowing what we're talking about.
Brian,
I'm still sorry, yeah. So I think what's important is that we continue with a process that makes sure we feel informed, but to me, it's, we have a work session after we receive information from you where we can review it on our own to come with questions. Then you present something at a board meeting, we have another work session, and then we vote. So that is consistent with what you have said you needed in terms of processing information. And so I am in favor of keeping I think 4 sessions is a ton. I think what we do, especially having more knowledge in terms of finance and budget, I feel like there are opportunities to ask questions.
Can I add an amendment to that? Can we get that information not on a Friday before our Tuesday board meeting?
It's reasonable
For a
to
work
ask for
session.
that
For a work
as
session. Yeah.
early as Bill feels prepared to offer that based on, when do you feel is the earliest you can offer, after knowing all the staffing decisions and?
Well, I think coming to a work session in May, we're gonna have a pretty complete budget. If anything it'd be a legislative problem that we didn't know, would be after that in a biennium. But like this year, we'd be pretty solid, by the middle of May.
So what he's asking is, can we get an early look at it?
So-
Well, I
Yeah, I
think
think
it's
so.
gonna depend, I'm just gonna give you that
Wednesday
political,
rather than Friday.
politically correct answer. It's gonna depend, because it's gonna depend on when that board meeting falls, and it's gonna depend on what's happened legislatively, how quickly they've made those decisions. Because if they make a decision on Wednesday, it's gonna be awfully hard for Bill to turn around and have it for you
No,
on
I
Friday.
get that, but the decision's gonna be made this year very minor. There's a lot of things that we can get that's going to be set already.
That's kind of why I was saying, let him try it.
Yeah.
Let him put it together and try it without you officially adopting the policy until you've walked through what
Right.
you kind of outlined, is what my compromise question was to it. Before you say this is exactly what it looks like, let him try to walk through, hey, we'll try to have this as quick as we can in front. We know this work session in April is, I don't know the date of it. Well, we're already in April, so it doesn't matter. Of May is this date, so he can try to get his information together for you as far in advance as that as he can. Share that with you, and then you can have your work session, your regular session, your work session, and regular session in June, which would be your 4. but I don't want to paint Bill into a corner because I don't know exactly when. He will try to get it to you as far in advance as he can, not Friday, not Thursday, hopefully a week or more in advance of that work session if he's able to, is what I would say he would try to do.
So this year shouldn't be as bad because one party controls the whole thing. So there's not gonna be there's not gonna be a lot of infighting. And Brian, I do agree with you, when I did my finance training, it was very frustrating from the corporate world to the school finance training. And I get what you're saying because it is whack-a-doodle.
So you said you had 4 bullet points. Have you presented
Yeah,
all
what's your
4?
fourth
No,
one?
I did the third one.
Let's do the
Okay, so
fourth
let's
one.
do the 4th one because it's 8 o'clock and we still have a closed session to move into.
So the fourth one is that I would propose that we vote on the
Are you
budget.
proposing or is it
No,
is it
no,
a
this is
policy
Another
committee?
hot topic.
This is a hot topic.
This is another
This
hot
is-
topic.
It's another, so
Brian
he's
proposal.
proposing it and you guys say it's a hot topic. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so I got 49% on this one. So last year, okay, so again, just leveraging my experience, we voted on the entire budget as one big vote. And so my recommendation is I'd like to have the budget broken out into its respective categories that we have, not at the fund level. You've got the general fund, you've got the early childhood education. It would be mostly at the general fund category level. And so I wanted to, the recommendation is to have it vote, but have the option to pull out certain categories and like a consent agenda concept. So
Line item veto.
line item veto, but it wouldn't be like every single, it would be like, it'd be at the category level. And so the category level would be at the object program code level. But that is my recommendation.
And can I ask, what would be the purpose of that?
That's the
So,
purpose.
yes, so there are scenarios, and I don't know if there are any, but the intent is that I want a school board member to have a voice. If they don't like all of the budget, they don't have to say no. They don't have to say no to the whole thing. If they don't like of transportation costs, it's their position to say, hey, I think we can do better. I don't have the answer on why this needs to be done, but I do feel like we need to make sure that school board members, as they have conversations with community members and so forth, you have the option to pull something out if you don't like it. So,
Can
I
I
totally
just say this?
Yeah.
Isn't that what the work session and you're asking questions are about? If you can't
Yes.
get your point across
Yes.
when you're asking the question, I don't know that pulling something off and saying, I want to vote no against this,
yep.
hasn't already proven your point when you've said, hey, tell me why finance for the transportation department is this, if you've had 3 opportunities to discuss. I
Yep.
think most people would know that.
Yep.
To me, we're trying to solve a problem that's not even a problem.
So
And then I'll shut up because it's you as a board
Well,
who gets to
and
decide
so-
what you want.
And that was the conversation, so like from my position, I think that if we go through these meetings and we get that addressed, if we get up to the time of voting on the budget as a whole, and you're still not satisfied with how that played out for you on the big budget, that you still vote yes or no for the budget. And if you vote no for the budget, when you're asked, are there any further, discussion, it's your opportunity as an individual to say, I support the overall budget except for this one line in the budget, so I'm gonna be voting no because of this line. And that's how you should be able to handle it. So I don't think putting something into a policy will particularly then give board members
Agreed.
a voice, because I think it'll be very detrimental to the district when we're taking a whole budget and need the budget prepared so we can function and operate. If any line item would get nixed by not just a board member, but multiple board members, that would mess up our budget as a whole as we move into the July 1st. And I just don't know how that would play out, and I think that would be very detrimental to the district.
And that could affect just business, making sure bills are paid, things like that, and things were.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Well, it is a little, it feels micromanaging to me. I hate to say that, but like, that's how it feels.
Understand, so it's not at the line item level, let's make sure, let me clarify that. It'd be, I think at the people support level, it would be instructional support level, it would be whatever
Still a line
the
level.
board. Again,
But
but
I
it's
do
not,
think it's covered in the first 3 bullets.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not
I
like
think it's kind of redundant.
we're not going through like all 50 different line items or 100 different line items.
Now, there are scenarios,
Or 26,000 different line
but
items.
there may be scenarios where I agree with the budget, and there may be scenarios that I may not. And so, if I say no, then I explain why I say no. I don't know if the reason of my no is captured in any of the notes. It says Brian Thompson, no for budget.
Well, I just think that if we have 3 sessions where or at least 2 working sessions that we're going through it, I think that those questions would be either answered or we would ask for more information on that so that we wouldn't need that 4th bullet.
There's one big bill that we are approving, and I think we should break it up. That's just my point of view.
But I don't think it's important, and maybe it's just like how I look at it as a board member or not. If I have the opportunity to ask my questions, it's not about like what it later says on public record of whether I voted in favor of a certain line item or not. It's that I, as a board member, felt like I had the knowledge and information to vote yes or no on something.
So can regular board meetings be used to ask those kind of questions, or are we only using working sessions to do that?
Don't you think in the,
That's what
you
working
should be able to
sessions
ask?
for.
Well, the work sessions are all the information that you feel like you should, ideally, really, I think one of the things as a board that we're trying to do a little bit better of over time is when we get to the actual table up there, that we feel ready to vote, and it's not as much of the discussion and things that happen.
Totally makes sense.
If you still felt like something was like, I still don't get this, or I still don't agree with this, or this is my point, this is why I'm voting no on this, that is an opportunity for you to say, I'm voting no, not because of all these other things, but because of this one thing that I just don't think I can support. And that's your opportunity to share your opinion.
So let me ask you, how many instances do we have of working sessions to do this, to share that point of view?
2.
And the first one is used for generally the
Presenting it.
overview, presentation of the bill.
So it would be the one before you vote.
So yeah, so I have the one working session before I vote to ask my questions.
No, to share
But
any
again,
sort
or
of,
to share my point of view, yep.
yeah.
So I have I'm gonna get the document a couple days in advance. I'm gonna present it during a working session, may or may not have questions. We have a regular board meeting where I'm not, best practice not to ask questions. Then I have a working session where then I can ask my questions, but might need more information for X, Y, and Z. And then the regular board meeting, I have to vote on it.
Well, wait,
That's
when
the
we have
model
our-
that you guys have just shared. Just
No,
wanna
when
make sure
we
we're
have
clear.
our first work session on it, though, it's presented to us, it's the first time, we've heard it
Work
and
session number
discussed
1.
it.
Yep.
We have the opportunity at that time to ask questions and get clarity. And then it can be presented at a board meeting, and then it can get presented at another work session. The other
And then we
thing
vote.
that we had discussed during policy is there's nothing that keeps us from requesting an additional work session in there to have a budget discussion. If it happens to be a legislative session where we have lots of revenue and expenditures all being dumped on us, like last session, we probably need a couple of budget discussions. And so it's just that right now we have scheduled work sessions and scheduled board meetings. It doesn't keep us from adding some,
So
depending on the year.
Here's what I'm hearing. From your bullet points that you presented to the board, all budgets will include the data object level program. Percent variances will be presented with commentary as to why that happened. The Board of Education will have 3 meetings to review the budget, right? We can all agree on those 3 points. The one that I think we're stuck on.
3 was 3 regular board meetings, but what I'm hearing from everyone is
It would
that
be
you want
included
2.
with work sessions.
So it'd be 4.
Right.
Right,
4
It would be
For
work session,
board
board,
education
work session.
meetings.
Yes.
yes, for me, so
So that,
even, but whatever, I think that would work. 3, Bill says that's doable. The one that we're stuck on is the budget broken down into categories, line item veto type things.
Well,
So I would say, let's just
It's
try
really,
it with the 3 bullet points that we have now to kind of see how it works, and then work out some of these kinks over time, and maybe this comes back to the policy committee after this May, when Bill's had a chance to run through it this way, to see, because I'm trying to move the discussion along here too, because
Good.
we could sit here and circle forever.
Yep, good
on this one
idea.
topic.
Excellent
So
idea.
let's see how it works in practice before we put it into writing. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Great
So
job.
there is
Policy
another-
So what's gonna happen in the board meeting? Are we just gonna approve the legislative changes?
Yeah,
Yes.
this was
Okay,
just
got
our
it.
discussion.
Yes.
For this time,
There
okay.
was one other thing that we highlighted here. The school district must also post materials above on the school district website, including a link to the school district's school report card on the Minnesota Department of Education's website. That's in our policy today. Do we do that?
That is
Good
up
question.
there under, is it World's Best Workforce? It's on,
The,
it is up there.
so there is a link to the school, to the report card with MDE.
Yeah.
Okay, I was looking
can
under
find
the
the
budget
finance side.
stuff and I couldn't find it, so.
You said it's
Okay.
under the world's best.
They'll figure it out.
workforce.
I'm just gonna, we can consider maybe changing it to a different.
Well, at the same time, if we need to add a link to the finance page, you
I
certainly
mean,
can.
It might be helpful to add it to it, because that's in our current policy today, that it, and it's tied to budget, so I think that's what people are looking for. That's where I look for it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, so the next item on our agenda is a closed session. Now, during working sessions, we typically don't do any type of votes, but for best practice and to try to like make our processes the same across all of our types of meetings, I feel like it's important to have that vote at that table where we're here to move into closed session. So the next item on the agenda is a review of pending litigation. In order to consider this litigation, the school board must meet with its attorney in a confidential setting to obtain advice regarding pending litigation. It would be detrimental to the interest of the district to hold a public discussion with its attorney regarding its legal positions and strategy. The matter to be discussed is a case entitled Coon versus Independent School District 194. The specific subjects to be discussed pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.01 Subdivision 3 are the district's legal positions, defenses, and strategies with respect to the pending litigation, including potential settlement or resolution of such claims. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05 Subdivision 3B and the attorney-client privilege, I will entertain a motion that the meeting now be closed for the purpose stated. So do we have a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
So we have a motion by Director Carly Anderson and
Good job.
Director Lind, are you doing the second?
Of course, yes.
Of course. All right, do we have any discussion on this? All right, so let's put it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 The board will move into closed session. Thank you. Yeah.